Hello and welcome to Insight. Today we have with us a best-selling author, historian and columnist, Vikram Sampath. Join me and Vikram as we discuss Hindutva, Savarkar and the complex narratives taking shape in India today. Vikram, welcome to Insight. It is such a pleasure to have you with us, especially now that I have an opportunity to interview you in your city.
Thank you, Rami. Always a pleasure.
I think, congratulations are in order. 2-volume, huge book, has done exceedingly well. So congratulations.
Thank you.
On that note, let me start this conversation with Savarkar. I have noticed, and so have a lot of other people, I believe, that in the last few years, he has come into his own. A lot of people are talking about him. He has captured the nation's imagination. Correct me if I'm wrong, I do believe that, there is this sort of a cultural, historical renaissance that maybe has started in India, where we have begun to look at heroes that had been overlooked before. Savarkar, of course, is one of them. But do you think he is the only one? Or do you think there are many like him? Or do you think he has started this churn where a balance is going to come in again?
I think that's a great question. That Savarkar, I think, embodies that aspect of our Indian freedom struggle, which has always been suppressed. The subaltern voice, so to say, of the freedoms movement, where we've been fed, I think, a very, very simplistic, linear, monochromatic narrative of what India's freedom movement was all about and how we won our freedom. That famous Bollywood song of Sabarmati ke sant tune kar diya kamal, de di hame azadi bina khadg bina bhal. So without any kind of an armed struggle, we just kept having these mass movements. Not for once am I disparaging the importance of those movements, but we've always been told for generations now that it was the non-violent struggle which won India her freedom. I think in the Amrit Mahotsav occasion, when we are celebrating 75th year of our freedom, there's a need to relook at all those other stories, the continuous stream of an armed rebellion, armed revolt against the British Raj, which continued from 1857, the first war of Indian independence, till 1946, which was the naval mutiny in Bombay, and the allied with that, the Indian National Army and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's role, which is what got India her freedom eventually. So in this long list of heroes and heroines who belong to this armed struggle, their stories have always been subsumed, their stories have been willfully suppressed, and Savarkar was part of that armed struggle too. So of course, in his case, the suppression is for a dual purpose. One is he belongs to this armed conflict stream of India's freedom movement, but also as the progenitor of Hindutva. So both of it needing him to be thrown under the carpet and brushed aside. But numerous others who were not necessarily the Hindutva stream, but those who were in the armed struggle, their names probably appear as footnotes in our books, especially textbooks of history, including someone like Bhagat Singh and so on. A Delhi University book called Bhagat Singh, Shurjo Sen and all these others, Jatin Das, it was a book by Bipin Chandra and Mridula Mukherjee, which called them as revolutionary terrorists. The word terrorists, for which in 2016 you had Bhagat Singh's family members complain to the then HRD minister Smriti Irani ji that this is not acceptable to our family, that this terminology of a terrorist was used by the British against our ancestors, and in independent India we are using the same kind of term. And for a young mind who's reading these books, what sort of an image does that conjure? On the one hand, in the television you're seeing terrorists ambushing people in Kashmir or in the Naxal dominated areas, and you also see Bhagat Singh named as a revolutionary terrorist. So there's a subterfuge, very subtly your mind is conditioned to think that all these were fringe elements in the freedom struggle and that there was only one dominant narrative, one family, one party, which got India her freedom. And I think that is the biggest problem. And Savarkar epitomizes that. And I think he becomes the fall guy for multiple reasons. And I'm glad now that people are relooking at his work, relooking at his thoughts, which were, I think, far ahead of his times, and now trying to make sense and saying, hey, I mean, when you read the man, you realize what is it we are demonizing him for. He's very rational, he's very logical, he makes a lot of sense compared to his contemporaries, including Mahatma Gandhi. On many issues, this man is more crystal clear in his thoughts. And why has the so-called liberal narrative in India been so against him? So I think sunlight is the best disinfectant. So whenever the facts are made available, people themselves are now questioning, saying, why were we told to hate this man? He's not that bad as we thought he was.
Correct. But when you say liberal narrative, does it really represent that narrative?
It's a euphemism. Usually this hyphenation of left liberal, I don't like it, because the left is anything but liberal.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's just come as a part of the way we speak.
But also tell me, Vikram, why was there this concerted effort to play down a very courageous armed struggle, as opposed to the kind of popularity that the non-violent struggle got, because both of them were aiming at the same agenda.
Right. To my mind, Rami, I think it stems from the insecurity, particularly of the first independent government of India and its head, for whom it was a new nation that was being built. At the same time, if you see the kind of surveillance that was put on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, even though there were unconfirmed reports of his death in a plane crash in 1945, but we don't know whether he really died, whether he was Gumnami Baba who came back, whether there was constant surveillance by Nehru's government on Netaji. What was it that he was so scared about this man? Was it a challenge to his own authority in government? By then his this icon Mahatma Gandhi was assassinated, so there was nobody. Patel was a challenge, but then he died early. Ambedkar was shunted out. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee died in mysterious circumstances. So each one who posed a challenge to the independent government of India was somehow shunted out. Charges were framed against them like they were against Savarkar. He was fixed in the whole Mahatma Gandhi murder trial, of which he was honorably exonerated. So this need to take away all those other elements and to inherit or bequeath the mantle of the true legacy of India's power, of being the people who fought for freedom, and that nobody else was part of that stream. I think that is what led to that. And more so, the demonization of Savarkar, I would see it as a more recent phenomenon, only in the 2000s, maybe early 2000s, after the first NDA government under Mr. Vajpayee came into power. Because till then, if you see, even when Savarkar died in 1966, the then Prime Minister and the tallest leader of the Congress to date, Srimati Indira Gandhi herself, had such glowing tributes paid to him.
Did she not issue a stamp?
She issued a stamp in his honor. She gave personal money for a memorial fund. She also got a documentary film made on him, through the government of India. And her words, I mean, if it's just a homily she was paying, it's okay. But then she had very, very rich tributes being paid to him, that his role in the freedom struggle was a very unique chapter, and that his name is a very byword for patriotism, courage and revolutionary thought and all of that. So in 1966-67, I'm sure Indira Gandhi also knew that here was a person she was praising who, according to today's Congress, was a traitor, was a betrayer, was a British stooge and collaborator, was an Islamophobe, was Gandhi's murderer. Why on earth would she be doing that? So there was that acceptance of Savarkar, and particularly including Congress leaders from Maharashtra. I think the respect with which they held him continues even now, perhaps. But I think the change happened only after the NDA government, where Savarkar suddenly started occupying center stage in the polity, with his portrait being unveiled in the Central Hall of Parliament, which caused a lot of hullabaloo. Then you had Mr. Ram Naik actually put the plaque in his honor at the cellular jail, the Kalapani, where Savarkar was incarcerated. And 1 year later, when the UPA came to power, his successor Manishankar Iyer got that plaque thrown away, and there was so much of acrimony about that, bad diatribe against Savarkar and so on. I think till then, the Hindu right, so to say, was not a political challenge for the Congress, and so the Jan Sangh was hardly powerful, the BJP was not even born, so they could afford to be generous to some of the icons on the other side of the ideological spectrum. But I think from 2000, once the first non-Congress and a BJP-led government came to power, and then of course after 2014 when they've been completely dislodged, the insecurity is very, very real. That their what they considered their legitimate position in power has been challenged by an upstart, and so to hit out at your political opponent, all you need to do is to hit at the ideological forefather of the current dispensation, and Savarkar therefore becomes a fall guy there, not realizing that he was actually never a part of the RSS, and he was always part of the Hindu Mahasabha. They had a very tenuous relationship, he and the RSS, and so that's the sad part, that people don't get into historical nuances and just have this very broad brush view of
black and white,
things.
and it never is.
True.
But so you mean to say that he became a contentious issue even though there wasn't much work on him, even though there wasn't a lot of scholarship, even though academia didn't pay a lot of attention, just because of the political underpinnings?
Yes, completely.
And this was post-2000?
Post-2000, because even in 1983, when it was Savarkar's centenary year as well, then too Indira Gandhi issued a very, very celebratory message for him. Imagine someone from the Congress doing it today. There is no grace and open-mindedness to accept that, only because today those who they think are Savarkar's ideological descendants or successors are their direct political opponents, and so to oppose them you can't be kind to one of their predecessors.
Absolutely, but you made a very interesting point that Savarkar did not really have close connections with the RSS, but that narrative keeps getting pushed forward. Could you then tell us the difference between Savarkar's Hindutva and the RSS's Hindutva?
So Savarkar was very infamous for saying this, there was a 3-line statement that he gave, that if there's an epitaph of a RSS Swayamsevak which lists his achievements in life, it will have only 3 words. He was born, he joined the RSS, and he died. That there was nothing else worth the man's life he would do as an RSS Swayamsevak. So that was the kind of equation he shared, particularly with Guruji Golwalkar. With Dr. Hedgewar, there was some amount of, because Dr. Hedgewar and Savarkar's elder brother, Baba Rao Savarkar, was one of the founders of the RSS, along with Dr. Hedgewar, Dr. Munje, who was one of the earlier presidents of the Hindu Mahasabha. So it was a close-knit, saffron brotherhood, so to say. But I think the schisms started appearing more under Golwalkar, because he wanted to chart a separate course for the Sangh and not be tied to the apron strings of the Hindu Mahasabha as one of their youth brigades or youth scouts, which is what the Hindu Mahasabha was seeing them as. And so many of Savarkar and the Hindu Mahasabha schemes the Sangh actually opposed, particularly this whole militarization. So during the Second World War, Savarkar's idea was we need to recruit more and more Hindus into the army, British Indian Army, so that they could be trained in warfare. And in the event of a civil war between the two major communities after the British left, the Hindus need to have knowledge of warfare and should be armed, because the entire community had been emasculated due to ahimsa of so many decades. Whereas 60 to 70% of the British Indian Army was composed of Muslims, particularly from the Northwest Frontier Province and Punjab, the frontier areas. And also some of these Hindu soldiers could then be seduced to patriotism and they could move away to the INA and give Netaji the feeder circuit to launch the campaign against British India. So that was the idea of the Sainikikaran mandals that Savarkar and others started. So which was opposed by Golwalkar. He actively wrote out several memos saying, let's keep away. For him, the Sangh was a cultural body and we don't want to get into politics. And in 1939, when there was a year-long satyagraha, which was for the Hindu civil liberties in Nizam state of Hyderabad, for which several organizations, the Hindu Mahasabha, the Arya Samaj, all of them participated. They were arrested for almost a year. They faced the worst of atrocities. At that time, the Sangh again stayed away. And so that again became a bone of contention, which is where he gave that infamous statement. But the larger issue of how they differed in their approach, I think there was a fundamental difference, which is the Savarkarite faction always gave a lot of importance to one person. There's a lot of hero worship. You are rallying around a particular individual. And that individual could be a mythical person or a historical character, from Bhagwan Ram and Bhagwan Krishna to Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj or to Savarkar himself. You needed to be blind followers of a particular person and his viewpoint. And as that person's fortunes rose up and or down, the fortunes of the organization would also go up and down. Whereas the Sangh was totally different. For them, an individual was not important. It was the ideology that was much more important than a particular individual. So that is one reason why in a Sangh Shakha, veneration to Gandhi is perhaps still accepted. Gandhi is venerated, a Savarkar is also venerated. Everybody can be assimilated because it's not individual centric. But a Savarkarite faction of Hindutva, it would never accept a veneration of Gandhi. And so I think history is proof of which of these two versions of Hindutva actually stood the test of time. The Hindu Mahasabha petered away, it died into oblivion as Savarkar got embroiled in, and that's the whole disadvantage of an individual-centric organization. If that person has a fall, the organization also falls. Right. So when he got embroiled in Mahatma Gandhi's murder and all the defamation against him happened, the Hindu Mahasabha also died on. But despite having so many bans on them, the RSS continued to grow from strength to strength and rebuilt itself, reinvented itself, and today it's in such a dominant pole position when it comes to the politics of India, when the top, from the president, the prime minister, the vice president, everyone belonged to their, group. So what stands the test of time? I think that is what history is kinder to. So I think this version of being ideology-centric rather than individual-centric, that was, I think, the fundamental difference at a very, base level between these two versions of Hindutva.
Quite right, I agree with you. But like you correctly said, RSS has reinvented itself as well. And today when we look at Hindutva, even through the eyes of the BJP, through the eyes of the RSS, Mohan Bhagwatji has also made statements like, it includes everybody. It's a political ideology, and the word Hindu is being used as an all-encompassing political umbrella.
Right.
However, I find that scholars and media people, and even in social conversations, people are always very quick to thrust the fact that it's an extension, aggressive extension of a Hindu religious identity. Why do you think that happens?
Well, it's so Hindutva, the way it came about also when Savarkar envisaged, of course, he didn't coin the word. The word was in existence in 1890s when Chandranath Basu first, coined it in his Bengali book. And it was, when we look at it etymologically, what is it? The twa suffix that is added to any adjective. It is the essence of being something. It is the essence of being Hindu. What it means to be a Hindu is Hindutva. But Savarkar and I think that process began in the late 19th century with before Savarkar, with people like Swami Dayanand Saraswati, with Maharshi Aurobindo and Swami Vivekananda and so many others who gave this And Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, the whole resurgence of Hindu nationalism, so much so that even Jawaharlal Nehru, in one of his books in the 1930s, said there's almost a very thin line between what Indian nationalism is and what Hindu nationalism is. The two are almost, concentric when it comes to the way they exist. So today, in today's discourse, I don't know if a Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, who visualized this country as a Bharat Mata and had his famous Vande Mataram, which became a war cry for everyone, even he'll be considered a communal person and not given the respect he deserves, because we have come to think of nationhood and patriotism in a particular fashion, which is very, very devoid of any kind of love or respect for your own country. The distance with which you look at your own country, that's rife in every field. But what Savarkar did to the Hindutva which already existed was to put into it this spirit of resistance, that while the Hindu religion or the Sanatan Dharma might be as egalitarian as it is, might be as assimilating of every thought, every opinion, from atheism to everything else, or other faiths and so on, what happens when an egalitarian theology comes into clash or contact with another theology which does not believe in this kind of egalitarianism, which actually says my way or the highway, that there is only one path to God, and anybody who doesn't follow that has to be converted, goes to hellfire and things like that. And as a part of that, through allurement, through inducement, through coercion or through violence, getting people out of the fold, how is that very much a part of theologies like that? What does an egalitarian faith do then? Does it just sit quiet and take all these attacks, or does it push back and resist? Not predatorily, not against anyone, proactively go and attack anybody, but to protect oneself. And that was exactly what Hindutva was all about, and that's what Savarkar time and again expounded, including, in my book I talk about his conversations with Maulana Shaukat Ali, who was one of the founders of the Khilafat movement, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali, and he says, we have nothing against Muslims or Christians or anybody, as long as you don't do anything predatory about us. We are just organizing ourselves, grouping ourselves, and you don't have to feel threatened by us at all, because we are not a proselytizing religion at all. We are not going to poach onto your people. But if you are going to mount attacks on us, we are not going to keep silent. And that traces back, I think, Rami, to fundamental Sanatan Dharma principle itself, saying, is violence bad? And that's where I think Savarkar and Gandhi also disagreed, where right in the Bhagavad Gita, where Bhagwan Krishna tells us that if the opponent is your own guru or your your relative or son or whatever else, if the person is on the side of adharma, it's well within your dharmic duty, your bounden dharmic duty, to pick up arms and annihilate adharma. So absolute ahimsa has never been a part of the Hindu dharma or the Sanatan dharma. So, and this was what this Hindutva was talking about. It was digging into that aspect of our philosophy, which says for self-preservation there is nothing wrong in being assertive, being resistive. And the other aspect of Hindutva was also social modernity, because if you had to resist someone, you had to organize yourself. And Hindu society being so fragmented into so many different castes and creeds and communities, so almost all, contrary to what people think, almost all the propounders of Hindutva always, advocated a casteless society, so that the Hindus could unite. The identity would not be according to whether you're a Chitpavan or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or whatever, but as a Hindu. That becomes the overarching identity of the person. Only then you can combat anybody as a group, as a collective entity. And it was also essential that was the time of the census, and so your representation in the assemblies or the parliament depended on the population strength. So while all the other groups, though they may have been Shias and Barelvis and Deobandis, when the census would be done, they would identify themselves as Muslims, whereas the Hindu community would call themselves Sanatanis, Arya Samajis, Lingayats, different groups, and never be a collective whole as a Hindu. So for all these reasons of, resistive force, a modernizing force which spoke of cleansing your society of the evils, including, in the when the VHP was formed in the 1960s. If you read Golwalkarji's speech, then he also very clearly says, in the Hindu pantheon there is no one who is a patita, there is no one who is a downtrodden, everybody is a Hindu. So contrary to the popular narrative that is spun, that Hindutva is equal to Brahminical patriarchy and hegemony and all of that, it's actually the opposite, because it actually does disservice to the Hindutvavadis to be fragmented into so many sections. It is in their benefit to unify themselves, unify Hindu society, and that's why they always advocated a casteless society, right from whether it is Savarkar to today Dr. Mohan Bhagwat.
Absolutely, but you brought out these points which are all contentious in generally, the platforms that we've been used to discussing these areas, whether it is Savarkar, whether it is resistance, whether it is a unified Hindu society or proselytization. I believe, and of course, I don't know what you think about this, but the colonial lens has affected a lot of the subjects that come under the umbrella of social sciences, whether it's anthropology, whether it's history, and therefore we have looked upon ourselves as the other. Yeah. And therefore we have, made certain errors in observing ourselves. Having said that, I also would imagine that this would be a difficult task for you to do, because academia has been dominated by elitist scholars who have used the colonial lens and are not very tolerant of people using more indigenous lenses to view themselves. How has your experience been with this?
Terrible.
So I'm not very far out in my assessment.
Not really. And the whole viciousness and the manner in which the cabal falls on you is something that I knew it exists, because as a young person I'd read people like Arun Shourie, who in his eminent historians had detailed the modus operandi and the manner in which these people operate. Sitaram Goyal or Dharampal and so many other historians who were on the nationalist side, the kind of travails that they had to face to put out an alternative viewpoint to what was the dominant narrative of the clique. Those are part of folklore, and it's usually shoot and scoot allegations. There's that famous episode where I think someone like Professor Romila Thapar had made some claims of Hindus persecuting Buddhists and some examples, and there were 3 examples that she gave or so on, and Sitaram Goyal actually refuted all the 3, that these were actually false claims that were being made, and he challenged her to a public debate to trash it out. But obviously, it's shoot and scoot. You make the allegation, you're never there to face it, you're never there for an intellectual counter. It's always my way or the highway. And what you said was so right, that I think the dominant historiography in India, particularly after independence, and that's a very sad thing, that even under the British rule, there was this nurturing of a nationalist school of history writing. People like Bhandarkar or V.K. Rajwade, R.C. Majumdar, Radha Kumud Mukherjee and C.V. Vaidya, several others who, Jadunath Sarkar and so on, who wrote from a very nationalistic perspective that was allowed even in the British times. But after independence and after becoming a free country, we have not had scholarship which is considered, right wing there's no left and right when it comes to India. I would say a nationalistic view. There are so few, and then there's a lot of scoff also saying, where are the right-wing intellectuals? Obviously, there may not be many, because you have not allowed them to be nurtured in your closed cabal university setups, and so that's how this gets perpetuated all the time. And those who are outside the system and who come from outside, they are constantly derided and looked with so much of derision. So for me, in the last couple of months, the number of hit jobs that have been done in terms of articles written against in friendly media portals and media channels or newspapers or whatever is quite mind-boggling, and that just shows that somewhere the the core has been rattled so badly, you then get into personal slander, you discredit the person, you kind of question his or her credentials, and these are all part of a toolkit, which is what Arun Shourie had listed in his Eminent
Many years
Historian.
ago.
The problem is, I've trained to be a historian. I've done my doctorate in history, to which also there are questions. There's social media trials. All of this happens, but then you've not been a part of the group, so then you're not allowed. Let's discuss and debate and have a conversation on the merits of the case. Let's not get into personal slander. Let's not get into questioning someone's credentials and who are the people doing that. So I think this kind of tendency is very much, it's to scare away people from coming into the field. And with no institutional support, with no governmental support, and with no university backing, it becomes very difficult for people. Livelihoods have been spoiled in the past, their promotions, fellowships, all of that, only if you held a different viewpoint, peer reviews. So you will get peer reviewed by another person only if you agree to that, to the consensus that the cabal has. So I think it's become such a toxic domain, the humanities particularly and history also within this rubric, that people don't want to. Sensible people would like to stay away from it, saying, why do you want to get into this den of snakes? You'd rather stay away. And that's the sad part, and that's what they want. You be so vicious that everybody is pushed away, and then you hold the fort and keep perpetuating these lies year after year. And then you repeat a lie 1,000 times, it becomes a truth. That's the way things work.
That's incredible that you've had to go through this just because you are a trained historian who chooses to look at even a subject like Savarkar based just on facts. There isn't really personal judgment involved in the book. Having said that, how do you then think that, we're talking about reclaiming our history, we're talking about reclaiming ancient places of worship, our social sciences and other subject expertise like this. How is that going to happen? Because there is so much of controversy involved with reclamation as well.
Yeah, true. And funnily, Rami, these are the same people who will cheer the bringing down of statues in different parts of the world and say this is what, wherever outside India, oppressors and so on, their statues being brought down or names being changed, that is hailed. Whereas in India, I quote this so often that, our greatest seat of knowledge along with, Takshashila, Vikramshila, it was Nalanda. Nalanda University, which was completely destroyed by the bigoted Bakhtiyar Khilji. It said 90 lakh manuscripts were burnt, and all the Buddhist monks and the Hindu Brahmins who were there in charge of the manuscripts, they were all massacred. So nobody knew what was in the manuscript. So everything was burnt. And
Did
Nalanda
it not burn
burned
for days?
For months, for 8 months. 8 months the Nalanda kept burning. That amount of knowledge was destroyed. But you come a little out of Nalanda today, the railway station there is Bakhtiyarpur. Which other country in this whole world would actually eulogize and glorify the man, the bigot, who actually destroyed the Princeton, the Harvard, the Stanford of your country? That is what we have come to. And so this whole controversy around changing names and so on, there is no reason why we need to have names of the Khiljis and Tughlaqs and others whose contribution to this country was zilch, and all they did was to oppress and conduct genocides against our people. I think there has to be a certain amount of brazenness about going about this, not caring for who says what and so on. That is in public perception. The Kashi Vishwanath Mandir, the whole reclamation of that space, sacred spaces which have been desecrated. There is a need to reclaim that, and that's in the popular public imagination. But I think academically too, there needs to be more and more independent scholars like me who what riles the cabal more is that I have nothing to lose. I don't depend on the university setup or on them or academia for anything. I have chosen, I have spurned offers to be a part of academic units. I've chosen to be independent only because it gives me the liberty to do what I want, and that's what riles people more, that there's nothing of this person we can snatch away, so all you can do is do personal slander. So more and more people who can be outside the system perhaps, and who can have the gumption to go on and do work, because there's so much work to do. There's so much of history to be reclaimed, so much of history to be remodeled and retold to the present and future generations. And I think it's also the duty and responsibility of the government and corporate bodies to perhaps ensure that in academia too there are parallel narratives, there are parallel voices, there is space given for different voices in academia, and it's not restricted to one particular clique or ideology.
You have hit the nail on the head when you said that, we are one of the few civilizations that glorify our persecutors. But aren't there heroes within other communities that one can actually, back up and say,
But true. I mean, this whole idea, first of all, is faulty, that a Muslim man or woman needs to be shown a Muslim only as an icon, or a Hindu needs to have a Hindu icon. Anybody, an Indian can have a Hindu or a Muslim or a Jain or anybody as an icon. Be that as it may, even if that is what you want. And this is very similar to the communal award. Only a Muslim can represent a Muslim in legislature or parliament. Not necessary. Anybody can represent you if they understand your viewpoint. But even if you want that, even within these communities, you have a Ras Khan, you have a Dara Shikoh, you have a Sant Shishunal Sharif from Karnataka, you have APJ Abdul Kalam, Arif Muhammad Khan, you have so many people who would probably represent that same community, and so you don't have to have Ghazni and Gori and Tipu Sultan and Aurangzeb and Timur and all these people to be representatives of today's Muslims. And to do that, you have to whitewash the crimes of all those people who were bigots, who were marauders. So I think that is, we need to dehyphenate today's communities, today's Muslims in particular, from all these people of the past. And I keep saying this time and again, that the albatross of these invasions, or the responsibility of all these atrocities, does not lie on the shoulders of today's young Muslim man or woman. We feel that if we talk the truth, if we tell the truth about the past, somehow these people will feel bad, and somehow the current social cohesion will get upset, which is, I think, bunkum. They need to be told too that this is not the past that you need to identify with, and this is not some history of 500, 600 years back which we're talking about. We are seeing that unravel in front of our eyes right now, what's happening in Afghanistan or in Bangladesh. Afghanistan, the way the women are treated, or the manner in which minorities are treated in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Bangladesh, it's probably as similar as what the Delhi Sultanate times would have been. So it's not some distant past we're talking about. So all the more the need for history is to give that lesson to Indians and Muslims today, that please don't identify with this strain of thought. If you really want to, Indonesia is a great example, which is a Muslim country, but still you see in Bali, you have the image of the Garuda, you have the Gitopadesh, you have the Ramayana and the Ram Leela as the main national opera and theatre. But that doesn't make them any less Muslims. So this whole Kattarwadi aspect of Islam, which has come to dominate, I think that needs to be shunned in India, and Indonesia can be an example, rather than take Afghanistan and Pakistan and others as the example, where culturally the roots train back to a Hindu culture, Sanatan culture, but by faith you're something else, which is perfectly okay. And the Sanatan Dharma is so assimilatory that it would allow this duality to exist. when you can be an atheist and still be called a Hindu, and you can actually do ninda stuti of your own God, as it was done by the Bhakti poets, what's wrong in probably praying to Allah or Jesus or anything? We would still assimilate them into your own fold as culturally as Indians, which is what Hindutva originally was, the cultural and national identity marker rather than as a faith-based identity. So I think that is the need of the hour, where we need to dehyphenate today's communities from all these atrocities. And once we do that, then this constant need to whitewash crimes, to wish away things, that will go away. We're sitting in Bangalore here, the most perverse idea that was launched of this whole Tipu Jayanti by the Congress government here. There was a spontaneous uprising against it, not by any, BJP and VHP and those people did protest, but you had Syrian Christian groups, you had people in Coorg, you had in the border districts with Kerala, where Tipu is still a hated figure, the Mangaloreans, the Christians there, or the Kodavas, all of these people came up in arms saying, we don't want to honor someone who massacred our ancestors, the Mandya Mayangars in Mandya. All these people who were victims of Tipu Sultan. So if you want to commemorate him only to cultivate your vote bank today, why do you want to choose him? As I said, if in Karnataka you have a saint like Santa Shishunal Sharifa, who's an icon of tolerance between communities and so on. So use that person. Why would you want to choose a bigot in the first place, whitewash his crimes, and then present a very sanitized view for that community to accept, and then expect everyone else also to fall in line and commemorate someone like this? So it's almost like telling the Jews that you have to celebrate Hitler's birthday. So that's as bad as it gets. But that's the perversity of Indian politics, and particularly the perverse idea of secularism that we've come to cultivate.
Correct. But I think in the case of the Jews, they accepted what happened. They ensured that there was enough dignity given to the events and the victims of that incident, and I think that helped bring societies closer, unlike here, where whitewashing is probably just, giving a bad example of what, should not
negationism,
be done.
whitewashing and negationism, that such things never happened. It's a figment of imagination. Historians like K.S. Lal have documented that in the 5 centuries of invasions, particularly between 1000 CE and 1525, the end of the Delhi Sultanate, the subcontinent's population fell by 8 crores. 8 crores people were actually, they didn't just drop
Where
down
did
dead.
They go?
8 crores. Whereas only 60 lakh Jews were killed in the 5-6 years of the Holocaust. So if that is a Holocaust, what is this? Is it worse than the Holocaust? No doubt. Will Durant, the American historian, had called the Islamic conquest of India as one of the bloodiest stories of human history, not just Indian history, but human history. But do we acknowledge that at all? Sitaram Goyal, in his very seminal work, lists about 40,000, at the minimum, 40,000 temples which got destroyed, in those, centuries of invasion and foreign rule and so on. But if one claims 1 or 2 of those which are very, very important, which are very, very sacred for the community, that becomes a big hue and cry. Whereas routinely in even Muslim countries, whether it's Saudi Arabia and so on, masjids are shifted here and there to expand a railway line or lay a new road or whatever. So whereas here, a sacred spot, when it is just being asked to relocate, and that the entire expense of relocation, a larger piece of land, all that is given, despite that, it takes the Hindu community in this country almost 150 years of fighting in courts to reclaim what is truly yours. So I think that is the problem, where we have not made peace with our past. And when we talk all this, we must emphasize that it's not revenge history that we're talking about. We're not talking about pulling out those wounds of the past to create problems today. It is like, as you rightly said, make peace with it. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened in South Africa, there was Ubuntu, which Desmond Tutu came up with, of, where, of course, it was different there, where the victim and the oppressor, they were still alive, they came face to face and said, we forgive you for what you did. And there was a closure and healing of wounds. Here, it's probably a civilizational wound, which heals only through, what we saw of a reclamation of Kashi Vishwanath, the whole glory and the splendor of that, or with the Ram Mandir being reconstructed in all its glory. So these are small incidents which will probably heal those long drawn civilizational wounds. It may not have impacted you and me directly, but there's something called conscious memory, which is probably there intergenerational, which generational wounds which trauma passes on from generation to generation in your DNA. So somewhere it may not have been something that's done to you directly, but it's happened to our great grandfather or somebody else. We do carry that trauma within us subconsciously, and psychologically that's been proved as well. So I think those things we need to come to a closure with, and the first step to do that is to stop this tendency of negationism, stop this tendency of whitewash, and tell the truth as it is, because telling the truth is not being offensive to anybody, it's not to demonize. And the same people who say, if we talk about these truths of the past, you are going to demonize the Muslim community today, then we should not be talking about the oppression of the Brahmins, of the non-Brahmins too, because then you're demonizing the Brahmins also today. You're creating fissures within the Hindu community. Is it okay then to talk about Hindu persecution of the Buddhists? Then you're putting up fights between the Hindus and the Buddhists. How is that okay? So similarly, when that is told as truisms, and caste oppression is very much a reality which needs to be spoken about. Similarly, the genocide of Hindus is also a reality which needs to be talked about and made peace with and move on. And that's the only way I think a civilization can move ahead in its chart of history, rather than be stuck in the past. These fissures will keep on erupting if we negate it, if we deny it, and if we whitewash it.
But Vikram, I know we're running short of time and we could have this conversation endlessly, but I'd really want to know, we are talking about historical fissures that still exist, but even today there is fissures in our society in terms of regionalism, where the South looks at the North as, maybe culturally superior, or, the North looks at the South as being politically dominant. There are all these differences. How does one mainstream this sort of, equanimous sort of civilization that we should aspire to be?
I don't think there's a problem in, the beauty of India is the much cliched unity within diversity. You have these different identities. So I am a Hindu, I belong to a particular caste, maybe that's a part of my identity. I belong to a particular linguistic background, and I belong to southern India, but I'm also an Indian. So I think all these identities, in my view, can beautifully coexist in this country. There doesn't need to be a homogenizing of anything. And sometimes, if it's for competitiveness, the South feels that, or the North feels that we need to do better than the South on economic indices or performance indices or whatever, then that's perfectly fine. A healthy competition between states, between groups is good. But I don't see this as being so disruptive as to tear away the fabric of India as such as of today. The tendencies may not be that bad that the South is going to secede or the North is going to separate. It's not that level of differences. So different identities, I think, can beautifully coexist within the larger rubric of being Bharatiya or being Indian, and that's the beauty of this civilization and country.
Well, finally, I have a request question to end our conversation with. As we know, a lot of amateur historians have become very interested in Indian history. What would you say would be the top 5 books that you would suggest to them, or authors, so that they could understand our complex history better, maybe in a more chronological order?
That's a tough question. Well, I think a lot of the works of, the nationalist historian that I mentioned, I think that should be must read. A lot of them sadly are out of print, but they're available online on archive.org and so on. So R.C. Majumdar's books or Jadunath Sarkar's, magisterial works on so many. In fact, he was the one, he learned Persian and he got the entire inscriptions of Aurangzeb, if we know today as to what they are, it's thanks to Sir Jadunath Sarkar. So people like him, Sitaram Goyal, Dharampal, I think there's a need to read and revisit all these historians. And there's also a need to read the so-called other side. It's only when you read every side, you realize what is wrong and what is right, and then you can make up your mind. So while I would recommend reading an R.C. Majumdar, I would also recommend reading a Romila Thapar and see for yourself which way you would like to, have your opinion against an Irfan Habib or a Romila Thapar. There's no need to demonize anybody. They have a point of view. You may or may not agree with it, but it's always good to understand what is that other point of view. What is it that I'm confronting with? What are the aspects on which I probably disagree with another person? So, like I said with the case of Savarkar too, you may love to hate him, you may love to love him, but let your love or hatred be informed. You need to have informed opinions about something. So, including if you have some kind of anathema for so-called Marxist historians, please read their works, please read what they've written so that you understand what the arguments are, and then you know how to counter those, or which of those actually you can assimilate and probably make a part of your own. And some famous historian had said every work of history is an interim report. It's a constant work in progress, because if everything that is to be known has already been known and has been cast in stone, then people like me would go out of job, because we have nothing to do, nothing new to write, nothing new to discover. The very fact that it's a constant journey of discovery gives the discipline that academic and intellectual rigor and sense of adventure. So my urge to all the what you termed as amateur or maybe upcoming historians would be to read and read and read as much as possible of all sides of the spectrum, and probably chart your own spectrum. There's no need to be called left or right. You chart your centrist path yourself. Nobody stops you from creating your own ideological path of historiography of India, and I think India is in dire need for more and more people who can tell her past in a better manner.
Quite right, Vikram. But thank you so much for being with us on Insight, and it was a hugely enjoyable conversation for me.
Thank you, Rami. Great talking to you.
I hope to see you again.
Thank you.
To say the least, that was a very enlightening conversation. As Vikram explained, history is never black and white. It is nuanced, and it is through pulling these nuanced threads that we can reclaim our narrative in the present. Whitewashing history, whitewashing the facts, will only keep the wounds open. Thank you for watching. Until next time.